Our speaker tonight is a distinguished author, educator, and designer. Barbara Stauffacher Solomon has taught at Harvard, Yale, and Berkeley. She is a second-generation native Californian, which is a lot to say, number one. And she has also won many awards for her work, beginning with the AIA Award for Super Graphics at the Sea Ranch in 1966. And more recently, the ASLA, that's American Society of Landscape Architects, award for the Regis Garden at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't know if any of you have been to the Walker Art Institute and been through the gardens and especially through the greenhouses, but it is a magnificent display of green architecture. This year, Rizzoli has published her book, Good Mourning California. That's Mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. This is a promo here for her book. I think you should all get a copy of this book and take a look at it. It's very important. The book is an exploration of the mythical and historical California and its relationship to nature. Nature in California as commodity, nature as scenery, nature as photo opportunity, nature as supermarket, and as paradise. Barbara Stauffacher Solomon's previous 1988 book on green architecture and the Agrarian Garden explored the elements of gardens, landscapes, views, and of green architecture, where architecture and landscape overlap. In all of her work, she is concerned about the overlay of theory and practice and how collective mindscapes are formed. Over the years, Barbara and I have participated in a number of competitions, including the Close Pegas Winery competition, in which she collaborated with Ricardo Bofill and Daniel Solomon, the Arts Park LA competition, where she collaborated with Lars Larup and Vito Acconci. Both of us were represented at the 1986 exhibition at Harvard called Transforming the American Garden. The character of time, as portrayed by Balzac, Flaubert, and now Mario Vargas Llosa, has evolved even further with the perceptions of timelessness landscapes by Barbara Stauffacher Solomon. She writes, quote, "We rush so fast into the vanishing point that everything vanishes." Barbara has engaged or is engaging in what Deleuze and Guattari call schizoanalysis, analyzing landscape as a process without a goal, but which flickers and changes with each passing moment. And she writes, quote, "The worst hell as heaven realities crack on the streets and cracks in the superstructures deconstruct into the latest MTV performances and high art." Please welcome Barbara Stauffacher Solomon.
Thank you. Thank you. How do you make the light work? Oh, I got it to work. Thanks, Pamela, I got it. I sort of read my lecture because I have it keyed into the slides, and if I don't read it, I get all mixed up. But after that, then we'll have questions. And since I don't have a thing to click here, I'm going to go like this every time the slide should change, because that's why I'm doing that. Let's take the lights off and put the first slide on. Tonight I'll talk about my new book, Good Mourning California, and also about my previous book, Green Architecture, and the big difference between them. I call the lecture Lots of Plots, because of the strange stories that seem to go around in people's heads when they rearrange the landscape, and the perhaps stranger storylines that grow out of the new landscapes that they have rearranged. In green architecture, I investigated formal, picturesque, and agrarian gardens and the fictions that created them, and some of the urban and suburban planning that can be traced back to them. Formal and agrarian gardens being the basis of the traditional cities based on straight lines and grids. Picturesque gardens being the suburbs with the wiggly paths and trying to look like the English countryside. Romantic gardens. In Good Mourning California, the subject is California and the verbal and physical lines and myths that led everybody west here to paradise. Promised, promoted, planted, and then paved at the end of the line. It's very nice to give it here where we really are there. Last two times I gave it were in Tempe and in Oregon and other places where they have all, especially in Oregon, they have all these, well, they hate California. And it's quite different to be saying it here where I think, you know what I'm talking about. You feel what I'm talking about, instead of it being some funny talk about this other place. While some men made revolutions glued to the mountains of their homelands, others, more inspired or desperate, heroes and losers, revolted with their feet and went to where the sun goes every evening, to search for the Garden of Eden, where they told us we had been happy, and we hoped we might be again. If Eden was where we came from, and much to our chagrin, God threw us out, we hit the road to make our own Eden in California, to paint our own paradise, pretty as a picture. Ostensibly out west, out of the curses of civilization and into the garden of the wilderness, we would find political and physical space and a wealth of natural wilderness to convert into the golden coins and commodities that we thought would be paradise. But nature in the far west, the promised glorious footprints of God, did not look like the green forests of Europe or New England or Bierstadt's painting that was in the last slide. The wilderness was frighteningly unfamiliar, gigantic, formidable, wild, and barren. The rain stops where the west begins. Didn't matter. The yellow deserts were watered and green gardens grew. At least they grew in selected green rectangles, colored on blank sheets of paper and on blank stretches of land. Seduced by the possible and the promise of paradise, California solved any problems. But even in the Wild West, had to be ordered to look like the familiar enclosed green rectangles of private sanctuaries and public playgrounds remembered from Europe in the East. Paradise gardens and public parks had to be made to look as if people controlled all the frightening wilderness. Gardens had to show that the people who owned the land had enough water and wealth to keep their grass growing green. Green was the color of cultivation, of civilization's rebirth in the West. Green grass proves that there is no death. Green is the color of hope, growth, greed, and greenbacks. Inside selected green rectangles, paradise as Eden, the future as the past should have been, with water, trees, and people where water, trees, and people were ordered, and the West was one. It's the story that's in every John Ford movie when they take the bad guy and civilize him, and have him marry the pretty blonde and make a farm instead of killing all the other guys. In California, the color green is morally effective, politically useful, and economically profitable. Paradise had to be a familiar green rectangle, elaborated on and embellished. Paint white lines on a rectangle of green, and everybody enjoys playing by the rules of the game. Gardens are special locations that people dream about, buy into, and have private parties in. Green rectangles are drawn up, planted, and expensive. Like art in movies, gardens are framed images that people can make and then move into. They are framed by cameras, money, prescribed views, private fictions, and high walls. Frames give status to the fictions inside. In green architecture, I studied and subsequently became obsessed by the Western tradition of these green rectangles. I made studies of formal gardens in Italy, like Villa Lante and Villa Giulia, and France, Annecy-la-France. They were models for Eden in Europe and subsequently in the West. Even seedlings were taught to grow in green rectangles. Green rectangles are framed by the format of every slide and picture postcard, movie and TV frame. They are the ground we move on through popular parks to poplars, public places, and palaces. Drawing all these pictures, making all this, led to projects. Studies of Verneuil and Marly led to my being invited by Pascal Clibier and Louis Benesch to be on the French team that won the competition for the redesign of the Tuileries in Paris. Framing off green rectangles of reluctant forests and subjugated trees led to my being invited with Michael von Falkenberg to design this linear garden, an arcade of green arches, instant green architecture at the Walker Art Center. I also had chances to indulge this obsession with green rectangles in San Francisco. Or it can be said that because I'm a San Francisco, I had this obsession with green rectangles. San Francisco is a gridded city in the Wild West. Straight lines of streets were drawn over pieces of white paper and then over the white sand and golden hills, relentlessly, from the port to the Pacific and from the bay to the backdrop of the hills. Selected rectangles in the grid were colored green. Parks, plazas, and playgrounds for Californians, play acting, in these parks and plazas and playgrounds. The Marina Green is a favorite green rectangle of paradise. It's built on land filled by the rubble of the 1908 earthquake at the far side of the Panama Pacific Exposition of 1915. It was the amusement zone for the exposition. It was always made to be a place of amusement. It is flat, open to the bay on three sides. On the fourth, a freeway rushes straight to the Golden Gate Bridge and the Pacific sunsets of pink, hot air. Straight streets rise from the Marina Green to Pacific Heights. In this project, I added another green rectangle at Crissy Field, west of the Marina Green. Perimeter housing encloses a green rectangle of grass. A California garden of tennis courts around an axis of lap pool. Crissy Field provides San Francisco with another green rectangle playground. Here the backgrounds of the marina perimeter blocks are tennis courts, flying away. This drawing is my installation at the 1990 Visionary San Francisco exhibition at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where by this time all the grids of the city have become playgrounds, which is what everybody wishes they would become. I painted 12 9x5 ping pong canvases with real nets for the back wall of the gallery, while the floor was gridded with regular ping pong tables for really playing the game. But in order to make rectangles, you have to make straight lines. When we walk straight lines, we do what we ought. While when we draw crooked lines, we have crooked thoughts. So I made a lot of straight lines. I planted straight lines of trees, ordered water to rise straight to the sky, painted stripes on Fifth Avenue, followed stripes in the Champs-Élysées, dove down strips in LA, walked down furrows in Lompoc, and speeded over lots of freeways. I made lines into logos, on books, onto walls. In subway stations and TV stations. Even my roof garden is lined with shadows in straight lines. It's walled with stripes and gridded with steel bars. Stripes frame our views and wall us in and out. The most seductive and gracious gardens are behind forbidding gates and garden walls. In Against Architecture, George Bataille wrote, quote, "The urban lawns of Paris look like bits of nature that did something wrong and were put in prison." In green architecture, I followed this logic and I traced it back to the agricultural lines of logic on planting the land. From the agriculture to the classical rationale of architectural orders, structure, and streets. Agrarian plots led to formal plans. Agrarian canals became aristocratic axes. Lines of trees. Oh, we're changing carousels. Here's the lines of trees that become colonnades and arcades. Drawn, built, and planted over the land. People move straight to their destinations. Green walls became stone walls, enclosing slashes of sky. Drawing all these formal arrangements of built and planted elements led to my meeting Ricardo Bofield, who at the same time was living in Paris and was also fascinated with the formal grandeur of French space. And for a while I worked at the Taller d'Arquitectura in Barcelona and Paris and drew more stripes of trees, lines of columns, and that was the last slide, and strips of marble in plazas. In this drawing, this is back in California, where this is the project I did with Lars Larup and Vito Acconci, where we were invited to design a piece of the Arts Park LA project, which I promptly ordered into stripes of grasses, where from the left to the right, it's the seagrasses in the Pacific, and then 101, and going through the valley to the Sierras and the deserts. California just in stripes of land, of planted stuff. And then the architecture, it's a real integration of landscape and architecture. It became also these stripes that turned into buildings when the function asked for it. In California, there's a compulsion to slash up and down the state. Recently, Vito Acconci and Stanley Seidowitz and I won a competition to do the public art along the Embarcadero in San Francisco, where the earthquake knocked down the freeway, and they're now making a promenade. We designed a line 5 feet by 2.5 miles long, a stripe of concrete with an 8-inch stripe of glass in the middle, which when trucks and need access and fire, to the piers, the stripe is on the ground. But where function, liability laws, and maintenance restrictions allow, and the scenic views prevail, the line rises to become a platform, a bench, or bollards. The argument in green architecture is based on this formal, functional, and fanciful differences between formal, agrarian, straight-shooting lines of landscape, rather than on No, that was right. Leave it. That was good. Go back. Yes. The whole book is the formal and agrarian as differentiated from this, the picturesque, romantic ramblings of deviously natural-looking, carefully planted materials. The romantic craving to live in illusion demanded the use of informal-looking arrangements of roads, trees, buildings, and people. The trees were to be as free as the people were supposed to be. Although these elements were designed to provoke, edify, impress, and amuse, the picturesque garden was universally justified as being natural and modern. Somehow, if the Greeks were for democracy and Rousseau was for natural man, modern men wanting democracy and free men could put a classical folie in the middle of a lot of wild shrubbish and have a modern garden, with all the right connotations. Gardens began to be scenery. Nature began to be called scenery. Propagandists began to use landscapes as stage sets. Unattainable islands became popular. Nature was carefully reordered according to the rules of the wild. The more perfect the illusion of an ideal, natural, free nature, the more facile the deception. the more successful the landscape, the more modern. The myth of Eden as an orderly rectangle of green was replaced by the more stylish myth of Eden as a wilderness, wild and free. Even the formal gardens in Europe were redesigned to match their owners' political proclamations. Garden theorists transplanted to the authentic American West had more complicated problems. With the real wilderness frightening and formidable outside the train or car or picture window, people nostalgic for some civilization tried to make their unfamiliar landscape look free and at the same time be contained within a green rectangle. Men and women came west to possess the geography, to use it and to change it. As they moved around the landscape, they moved the landscape around. Landscapes are made and erased as fast as they are dreamed up. And California became everybody's Garden of Eden, everybody's best and brightest, greenest paradise. In California, we made what the myths told us we wanted. And what have we got? Being a California, I decided to write about this, and this is the drawing that's on the cover of the book, which is sort of California as a happy whore. Good Mourning California is more or less about the myths that dictated California's destiny. Promise a treasure island, give a clue, paint paradise where everything you lost or want to find is found, where fear is forgotten and greed is allowed, and people will go there. Draw a map, make a point, a target, a colored blob, a line, and people would get on it and go. Maps provide ways to get to islands like California. California was named before it was known. In 1510, Garcia de Montalvo wrote, quote, that on the right hand of the Indies, very close to the site of the terrestrial paradise, there is an island called California, where there is no metal but gold. The island was inhabited by Amazon women and ruled by their queen, Califia. The trip began, everyone came. Cortez was the first to come. What he actually found was a hostile and inhospitable desert at the end of the line. And in disappointment, disgust, and high fantasy, and familiar with the Montalvo tale, he named the barren island California. And for about 250 years, European maps showed California as a large island, painted gold. The book is divided in three sections: gold, green, and black. Gold being nature, green rectangle, the garden, and the black triangle, landscapes. Nature is the golden focus, a sphere that pulls people here. Gardens are the green and greedy rectangle frames that make our movies and myths special. Landscapes includes the fuzzy stuff outside the frame, always changing, pleasing, teasing, always there but out of sight. Nature in California is pure gold. And who can question myth when gold was really discovered here? Consider the golden spectacles and commodities that nature offers in California. The sun, golden and glitzy, shimmering light at the end of the line, light without shadows or memory. Golden promises and immediate luminosity. Yosemite Valley, like sunsets over the Pacific, and gold in the ground, a fortuitous find for the myth of California. Nature was waiting to have its portrait painted, and Albert Bierstadt went west to paint California idyllic with God, bright and blonde, a spotlight at the center of the canvas, beckoning. Especially since these paintings were done during the Civil War when the East looked pretty bloody. California appeared even more paradisiacal. Nature in California has been imaged and imagined as Mother Earth, art, spirit, a commodity to use and the environment to save. California was a nature myth waiting to be moved into, the star of every cowboy movie. Oranges for health, California for wealth. Oil Dorado and El Dorado. A parking lot on the Pacific. Some of the world's most expensive real estate. Nature winking, blinking, a landscape of shiny images rushing by to buy. In California, the artificial is as genuine as the natural, only made of different stuff. And Californians are sinfully successful with synthetic effects. In our neon hunger to capitalize on our surprising spectacles and golden opportunities, we promptly package them for sale. The sun is for sale in California. Paradise has become the supermarket where everything is astonishing and in abundance, here and now, 24 hours a day. You can stroll down the furrows, picking golden fruit without toil. The chops don't remind you of dead lambs. The dappled light is like sunlight in a forest. Time is erased and there is no death. It's a palmed paradise oasis where everything recalled from Eden is perfected and greed is family entertainment. These shiny, safe Disneyland amusement parks of consumption, the second truly international style, have been promoted and sold all over the world, promoting revolutions and success everywhere they go. But if California was to be the Garden of Eden, it had to be painted green. Yellow deserts were watered, and green gardens grew. California is an oasis civilization temporarily watered by an impermanent source of water. Gardens have become ornamental, hypocritical pieces of decorated dirt, where people's myths of politics, money, fashion, racism, and sex are played out, if they can afford it. Once inside a garden, it's easy to not see out. The gardens most people see most of the time are freeway embankments. And here the green rectangle still propels our imagination. But it's now the glossy green highway sign pointing to whatever at the moment seems the most desirable Eden. It promises freedom on the freeways. It announces the next possibility and the next, whizzing down the yellow brick road to an emerald Oz, paradise, Mother Nature. In Good Mourning California, landscapes are everything we see and don't see, following the yellow line to vanishing points out of sight. It doesn't matter where you go, just keep going. Just move along the yellow line to lots of plots from myths and movies. The book has 13 different endings, 13 different views of California, but there could have been as many as people have ever been here, and the reasons they came, the reasons they stayed, the reasons they left, the reasons they were seduced by some lines on a map or some promises or some lines of words in the media to come. Splendid landscapes and spectacular faults, visible and hidden, flash up and down California. The Gold Coast, mountains, valleys, the Inner Empire, lines of freeways, rivers, and aqueducts stripes, strips, and strip cities. We rush from one view to the next. The images we see are different and the same. Is California the Garden of Eden with Mother Nature as Eve? Or is California a wilderness fouled by too much growth, greed, and glitz? Is California Californication, fucking up the rest of the world? The Earth's last flashy chance to rush off to dream. And now everybody is waking up, and the dream is not always so good. Or is California a map of her own myth? An agreed upon illusion, and the only reason anyone believes is that everyone believes. In California, we excel in making images, and we love living in our landscape of images. We move, they move. Each view is a free-floating film of the transparent, the transcending, and the trashy. Landscapes are the surface of the spectacle. In California, we see landscapes as a screen, blank, waiting, and ready. Open space is why everybody came here in the first place. And the best landscapes are those that are open and white and clear and disappear. Skylines of mirrored glass vanishing into the clouds and sun. Glaring screens of red sunsets. Sky, water, air that are so and blinding light over the Pacific and the deserts. A shiny mirage, always moving. Stripes of freeways and strips of cities, airports, shopping malls, landscapes put up in order to be torn down for the next opportunity to put something else up and tear it down, newer. If we hesitate, our earthquakes and riots shake everything up and give us back the wilderness so we can start over again. Okay, now let's have some questions. You want to turn the lights on? Any questions about anything? Mm-hmm. The book, I must say that I think the word architecture never appears in the book. I mean, the book is much more for the general public, and the book ends up being much more a kind of like 144 pages of definition of the word landscape. It's not at all like the first book, which was used, to teach the history of gardens, and it's like a textbook in a way. This is much more... much different from that. I don't know how it will be used. I mean, it just came out last week, and of any of you who bought it, read it, you can tell me how it's going to be used. I have no idea. Except that it sort of does say that everything's a landscape. That it sort of takes away the possibility of just building pretty little gardens. I mean, this is a landscape. This is a great landscape. I mean, but everything is. Anything, it's not anymore, as far as I can see, some pretty little rich man's garden that you can call a landscape. Beyond that, I don't know what the book does, except celebrates I-5. Have more of those, which you can't anyway. Actually, I learned the word shrubbish from, God, I can't think of his name. One of the guys at Berkeley used that. He's a modernist. Oh, I can't think of his name. He's an architect, and he just, in the true modernist tradition, he built these perfect white objects, and all that other stuff out there was shrubbish. And that's his phrase. I just use it because I like it, but I didn't make it up. And I can't think of his name. But it is how modernists thought about the landscape. At that time. No more, I think. Early modernism. Yes. Wait, I can't, a little louder. There's a second part there. Well, yeah, I have a big problem when I want to do a landscape. I'll want something so nothing and simple that the client doesn't feel, why should they pay me for that? You know, I'm not in favor of these really tricky landscapes that end up being in the magazines, of using I mean, they're designed to make they're good for business. You get in the magazines if you make the landscape look like you're playing artist. Whereas I like France. I like the grandeur of just a field of meadow, or just around a building, gravel, and maybe some poplars, and I do sort of hate tricky, over-designed landscapes. But I also, have been around a lot of landscape offices for a long time. I remember, when Larry Halpern's one of my best friends, and I remember when my office used to be downstairs, I remember they had to write lots of Latin names all over those drawings to get paid those fees. They wouldn't have gotten those fees if they just said, make one big green lawn. In those days, you still had water. It could have been one big green lawn. They had to make a lot of stuff. Part of the deal. Is that the answer to the question? I don't think so. I never got the question quite straight. Well, what I'm saying is that old concept of wilderness being where no man has tread, the virgin land. I mean, somewhere in the book I say, if you want her to be a virgin, well, she isn't. That idea that nature had to be virgin wilderness, well, we don't, unless maybe a few places in Alaska or Canada. I don't know where that is anymore. That's what I think I tried to say. Well, I'm sure, what we think of as nature was here when the Indians were here. But it's when we came, we just used it as a commodity. It never was, I'm sure once, but the Indians have been, there was a big civilization here before we killed them all off, living very happily with nature, as we think of it more, living with nature, and not just using it, but living compatibly with it. Oh, I don't know, it's different than Texas. It would be, I mean, I think nature, what we used to think of as wild nature, going on into the wilderness. I mean, it's like a little bit like hamburger and steak. There's not, we don't have much steak. We got, you mix a little bread in and a little this and that, and it's got a hamburger. I mean, a flower pot now we're lucky to have a flower pot on the deck instead of miles of untouched nature. I can't say, I don't know, how to compare California's nature to Texas. I don't know Texas in the first place. I could compare it, I suppose, to France and Switzerland and Italy if I had to, but it would take a little thinking. I don't know. You have some idea about that? They do. I mean, there's always been that myth. That's all I say about in the book, and it's not just from Europe, in Asia, everywhere. South American people think of California, the promised land, paradise. And even though it's all going to hell, people living here don't like it because the air is not divine anymore and there's too many freeways here. I was in the paper this morning that it's still growing much faster than they thought it was going to. People are coming in much faster than they're leaving. They sort of don't believe it if we say there's pollution. Nobody really believes it. You had a question? Somebody has one hand. I can't hear, a little louder. You've got to be a little louder. I can't hear. How do you do a job when you get one to make a pretty garden? You do it. You make a pretty garden. Take some money and go. I think I'm big on contradictions. It's like the first book says one thing, the second book says another. I think if I'm as easily seduced by a beautiful garden as anybody else, and if I had a job to do one, I would do it. I don't pretend to be consistent. The truth about that is that it was meant to be played, and my daughter and all her friends the first night started playing ping pong because that was the way it was supposed to be, and the curator of the museum had a heart attack, screamed at them, took the ping pong balls and the paddles, and hid them. And I had to come back on a Monday when the museum was closed and have the staff play ping pong so I could take these pictures of how it should have been. That's the truth. I mean, it should have been, everybody, people you should have come in the museum and you'd heard boing, 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 boing. People should have been playing, but they didn't let it do it. Buildings? Places to live in. I don't know. I have to think about it. I mean, buildings. The landscape is buildings. I mean, there's no difference. There's buildings, there's trees, there's street, there's people. It's all got to work. I don't see it as a separate. I mean, it's, you know, way Rome is just solid buildings. Out here, it's building tree, building tree. I mean, but it's all the landscape. Well, I think green rectangles are sort of finished. I mean, there's no water. I mean, the problem with California is what happens when they turn the water off, and one of these days, if people keep pouring in, there's just not going to be enough water. And you can't have green grass. I mean, it's left over from the English countryside. It rains all the time there. You can have wonderful green lawns. And to make them here, even though you want them, I mean, unless they're made out of, you know, what do you call it? I mean, you can't have them. The aesthetic has to change simply because there's not going to be enough water to make green lawns. And everybody liked that. I mean, it's this kind of thing. They feel they have to have this little hunk of green lawn. It means so much. It means that they have their mansion in the English countryside, their suburban palace, you know. And people's image of paradise has to get gold again, not green. Simply because we don't have enough water to keep you know, you can't keep making green lawns anymore. Right, Pamela? You can't. I mean, if they were, you know, you could use some ground cover or something that doesn't take much water if you want a green lawn. You kind of can't say. Also, it costs a fortune to make a lawn, mow it, keep it. You know, I mean, it's Palm Springs. You know, it's a way of decorating the dirt, and. I think it's something even if you love it, you can't have it necessarily anymore in California, simply because nobody can afford the water, and they will be able to less and less. It doesn't mean they still won't crave it. And those who can afford it will still have it. Oh, I think so, of course. I mean, styles change. I mean, the style was green, and now somebody, you know, you have to make a few golden gardens and get them in the fancy magazines, and all of a sudden gold gardens will be the style. People do what they think is style. I think that aesthetics change constantly. And they're certainly different in LA than they are in San Francisco. And they're certainly different in California than they are in the East or Europe. Definitely. Style. Okay. One more. Our attitude towards the Agrarian Garden? Oh, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I think everybody should. I like Agrarian Garden. I mean, one reason I made such a big thing about the Agrarian Garden in that first book is I was sort of horrified by something a friend of mine had said, that they wanted to plant vegetables in front of their house, and the landlord wouldn't let them because it made the house look like poor people lived there who couldn't afford to go to the grocery store. And I thought that was so, stupid that I decided to make this very fancy series backing up vegetable gardens. I remember, well, who is it? Some fancy British critic said to me, what do you mean you're going to write a book about kitchen gardens? I mean, I tried to take it, and yet, the agrarian gardens in California are so beautiful, the huge ones, the vineyards and orchards and everything. I mean, everybody's little kitchen garden doesn't necessarily look that splendid. But I think, that's the one thing you should do now with gardens, is plant your own vegetables. Is that what you asked? Good. And how can everybody say anything's wrong with planting your own vegetables? Except the landlord. He wants the image of the green, rolling green grass in front of the house. Okay. Thank you.